Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. Welcome, mentors. We are beginning 2021 with our 37th podcast, but it is our first podcast panel. I'm very excited to announce. I hope this new configuration will prove to be a productive format for addressing multiple issues and perspectives in one session. We have been so focused on our individual roles during this stressful time. As the result of the separation requirements, we're required to maintain our workload at home, and in many cases, we're being asked to be teachers, psychologists, and time management experts. In the absence of social connections and often without daily professional guidance, we tend to become frustrated, and understandably so, because sometimes without the information that we need, we leap to the worst case scenarios. We question whether we're doing a good job, whether we're doing what's required and being supportive, or whether we're causing more problems. My goal with these panel podcasts is to help us achieve some expanded understanding on what we have begun to do and ask questions that may navigate us with what we need to do moving forward and we do not know. My suggestion is that you listen with a pen and a paper in hand. We have limited time and will not cover all of the issues raised today, but we will raise some important questions, and sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. Give our mentors a foundation to serve as a platform for your further investigations. Get in touch with our panelists. I know they will be pleased to travel with you down any path you choose. Please look over previous podcasts, our guests and their areas of expertise, as what they have to say may be even more relevant today. You can get in touch with our panel or any of our guests through the tabs and website links that we have provided on the recordings. Today, we'll be exploring the effects of virtual education from three perspectives: a legal focus on special needs and district supports, the social emotional consequences of virtual teaching on teachers, students, and parents, and the impact of long-term effects of virtual teaching on the same populations. The discussion is divided into three parts. Some of the questions were submitted by listeners, and I want to thank those of you who contributed so much because you gave me ideas to formulate what we're going to be talking about today. I appreciate your support. First, we will define a problem, and then we'll spend time in two sections delving into a particular area. We'll get through as much as we can, so let's begin. I want to introduce our very distinguished panelists. Dr. Sharon Saline. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you so much, Judith. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you again, because this is your second time with me. I'm really honored that you're allowing me to do this with you again. Dr. Sharon is an award-winning author, an international speaker, as well as a recognized contributor to ADD, Attitude Magazine, and Psychology Today. She works tirelessly to support families and kids diagnosed with ADHD. Steve Waters. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Steve is joining us from the UK.
Hi, Judith.
This is a guy with a great personality. We had a wonderful conversation earlier. Steve taught in high schools for 30 years before spending 6 years as an educational consultant with the UK. And I have to give him credit for the title of our podcast, because when I was talking to him, he coined the phrase teaching in Covidland, and I loved it so much. That's where it came from. He is the founding CEO of the Teach Well Alliance, which supports schools to implement a culture of staff well-being and mental health. And of course, he was a consultant in education with the UK for many years, and perhaps still is. Are you still, Steve, a consultant?
No, no longer.
No longer. Okay.
But I do independent consultancy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Attorney Maureen Graves. Maureen earned a BA in history at Cornell University, researched small and medium industry through the Fulbright program in Watauga, Columbia, studied political science as a graduate student at Yale, and graduated first in her class from NYU School of Law. I hope I'm going to say this right. She clerked for Judge Dickinson Dubois in Federal District Court in Newark, New Jersey. Did I say that right, Maureen?
Judge Debevoise.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Maureen turned to special education law in 1994 when her own young children were diagnosed as having autism. Thank you, Maureen, for being willing to share your experiences and your knowledge with us. Thank you all. I so much appreciate it. I want to stop talking because people are listening now. They really want to hear what you all have to say, and I need to be quiet for a while. So I like to start the discussion quickly by playing a game. And the game is called word association. So I'm going to ask you to think of one word or a short phrase that comes to mind when you hear the title of this program, Teaching in Covidland. Keep it to yourself for a minute. And then I'm going to ask you to please state your phrase or your word and give me the reasons why you chose that phrase or word as being so important with what's happening today. Do I have a volunteer for someone to go first? Steve, thank you. Please.
Well, my word is burnout. It's something that I've been developing an interest in over the past, I guess, 2 years or so. And the reason why I'm choosing it is because prior to COVID in the UK, an awful lot of teachers were getting to the point that they couldn't continue. They're exhausted. They loved being in the classroom, but everything else about teaching was leading them to the conclusion that they needed to leave. And sadly, that is only increasing as a result of COVID. Even in the UK, with head teachers wanting to leave as soon as COVID has been resolved in their schools. It's something I'm passionate about trying to tackle. And also it's something that I'm really very worried about for our profession.
And the burnout you feel is due to the stresses that are being put on our educators right now, as opposed to just they've been teaching for 30 years and they want to leave?
Yes. Burnout is causing teachers to leave at both ends of the spectrum. So we have teachers who are reaching the age of 50 who feel that they can't continue. but we've also got early career teachers. In the UK, 33% of early career teachers are leaving the profession in the first 5 years. So it's not just an issue to do with the length of time that someone has been teaching.
Okay. Someone else want to weigh in with their word?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Interesting. Okay. Can you expound on
Well,
that a little?
this was hard because I was going to say patience, because I wanted to do a positive thing. But then when Steve went, I was like, well, maybe I should just call it as it is. So I'm just going to call it as it is, anxiety, with patience as the flip side.
Okay.
So, this is a time of tremendous anxiety for both students and teachers, and everyone is being asked to pivot frequently, to adapt, to demonstrate flexibility. And for many kids, they are experiencing what I call resilience fatigue. They're having trouble bouncing back. And of course, we know that resilience is the antidote to anxiety, because resilience is the ability to look at previous successes from past situations and apply those skills, that confidence, the lessons from those past experiences to something present to help us move forward. And this is particularly difficult for children with ADHD, or who are high functioning on the autism spectrum, and even kids with learning disabilities, because all three of these categories of kids all struggle with executive functioning challenges that are sometimes moderate and sometimes severe. And so when we are activated, when we are anxious, when we are engaging in poisonous worry, which is worry about things we cannot control, versus productive worry, which is worry about things we can control. Will I get everything done before I have to meet with Judith, kind of a thing. The response to poisonous worry is a physiological as well as a cognitive and emotional response. And it's generally all about negative expectancy. It's not going to work out. I'm not going to be able to do these things. And though that kind of thinking is kryptonite for resilience. And so for me, I said I choose anxiety because we have to address anxiety, not by going, addressing the content specifically, going from thing to thing, because you're just going to play whack-a-mole your whole life, but actually looking at the process of how someone's anxiety works so that we can intervene in that process and reduce worrying, help kids learn how to feel like they can control the knob on the button of their worries. And this is true for adults as well, so that we can have some mental space to nurture our resilience.
Okay.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting, Sharon, because I've been conducting surveys of teachers for the last 4 to 5 years. And before COVID, when I asked teachers to rank the mental ill health that they suffered, those teachers who did rank as suffering from mental ill health always placed stress first, anxiety second, and depression third. Stress and anxiety were a fair bit away, a fair bit ahead of depression. Since COVID, anxiety has now gone to the top of those three mental ill health conditions. And you mentioned that anxiety is about worrying about what we can't control. Because I've been interested in burnout, one of the 6 factors that Christina Maslach says leads to burnout in employees is a lack of control.
Mhm.
So if we combine teachers who feel that they haven't got control over their professionalism with the anxiety that COVID is causing about things they can't control, then we've got a kind of powerful powder keg there. Also, just to complete my thoughts, a researcher called Jonathan Glassard in the UK has conducted research into the impact of teachers' mental ill health on children, and teachers who are anxious pass on anxiety to their pupils, and the pupils try to make their teacher feel better by working harder, but they're worried that they won't be able to do that, and if they don't do it, their teacher will just become more anxious. So the connection between pupil and teacher anxiety is also something that we need to take into account.
That is also very interesting, Steve. And that makes sense to me because children pick up on the anxiety of the adults around them. And we know that while anxiety is not genetically inherited in the way that ADHD is, we know that anxious kids who come from kids who come from parents who are anxious or have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder have a predisposition to anxiety. And so that would make sense to me that when teachers are anxious, kids try to, accommodate them. The other thing that you said that's really important is that untreated anxiety has been found to lead to depression. So it makes sense. And stress is sort of a passive, as a passing condition. Anxiety is something where stress has been transformed, and it now hangs out. It's a kind of vigilance that people have, and so you can feel stressed on your job from day to day, but there's relief from it. There's not a lot of relief right now for teachers, and I know that in my district, at the upper levels, kids have a choice of whether or not to show their faces on screen so they could be teaching to avatars. Teachers themselves get a lot of good stuff from being with kids, and they're not able to do that. And so not only have they had to adapt and adjust their entire teaching method, they're not getting the goodies that they used to. And that would actually, sort of foment a kind of dissatisfaction, of course, but then anxiety, like how do I engage kids? How do I do this better? And then not seeing when you're ever going to be able to get back to what you really love. It's hard to take.
I have a question for you, but I want to see if Maureen is there. Maureen, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. I'd like you to weigh in on what your word or phrase is, if you would be willing to do that.
Sure. Mine was losing time. And I'm thinking of several things. One is, teachers who are having to spend a lot of time on mechanics, on computer things, and now are increasingly being told to do that as well as be in classrooms. So I think that sort of the time burdens, there are new time burdens associated with remote teaching. Also, I think that we're seeing, again, still the pressure on teachers to be reinventing the wheel, making up their own way of teaching early reading skills, for example. And there are excellent programs out there that have been research validated, they work, but often they're resisted either because districts don't want to spend money or teachers feel de-skilled by using scripted programs. But I think, one of the reasons that teaching is so difficult is that teachers are expected to create so many lesson plans. They don't only have to understand individual children, they have to try to figure out what the best way is to teach their subject matter. And, some teachers are better at that than others, but I think it's just an unrealistic burden that contributes to burnout. And then I also think of students losing time from lack of technology. I mean, it's appalling that this far into the pandemic, children are trying to access school with their parents' cell phones, or that several children are sharing an iPad and that we haven't managed to get broadband around the country or even into, public housing in New York City. So the number of children who are not able to access even what is being done is pretty awful. And I think it could be very quickly corrected by spending some money. And then the lack of materials that children have in their home, the lack of books that many families have, and with increased complications of using libraries. I think we ought to be pressuring Jeff Bezos to send books to every family in America. People are making a lot of money out of this, and if they care about education, they need to give some of that back. So those are, and then I would also point out that, for the students that I work with as a special education lawyer, they don't only rely on school to learn to read and do math and, someday do, AP World History. A lot of them rely on school to learn to talk. And, I'm afraid we're losing time during critical periods for development that, if that can ever be made up, it's going to take a lot more intensive services in the future than would have been required to do it right the first time. So I'm really worried that we're not looking at what kids need in this environment and coming up with safe and effective ways to do it.
Well, you all have made so many good points. Dr. Sharon, before you can incorporate it in my question, if you can, but I want to ask you, one of the comments that you and Steve have made kind of sync a little bit together, and the stresses that teachers are having that leads to, you said, the anxiety, which leads to depression, and the depression which has become more of a concern. I'm wondering from both of you if you feel that this issue is also an issue that students have, the idea of stress leading to anxiety, leading to depression, and if so, how is that affecting the teachers and whether they're choosing to stay in education? Are they feeling that like they can't help their students, they can't do what they need to do? Would that be one of the reasons they're depressed, because they can't do a good job? Dr. Sharon, are you seeing students and teachers expressing these concerns at all? Dr. Sharon, why don't you go first?
That's a very good question. I want to just address something Maureen said, and that I think that we are losing time in that kids are at various periods of their lives where they are building social relationships, social skills, and they are not necessarily developing those skills on a face-to-face basis. And many kids are isolated. I agree that because of food, housing, job insecurity, and systemic racism, many kids do not have access to online school and resources. And on top of that, kids who are neurodiverse need more support to attend school than they're able to. So what I'm seeing in terms of the burnout or the fatigue, the resilience fatigue, which is kind of leads to and can manifest as depression or anxiety, is that people are tired. People are very tired of this way of living, and that which is why I call it resilience fatigue. They don't see how to kind of get up again in the next day and do the same thing. And what happens is that a lot of kids are just angry, and they're isolated, and they're withdrawing, and they're sort of throwing in the towel. And that's what worries me the most right now, and particularly for alternative learners who need more support. And now their parents are having to be their tutors, manage their education without the, adequate training. And so it's just causing, enormous conflict in the family. And frequently for families, what I say is, talk to the school, figure out what the minimum is that your child needs to do, and stop there. Because we want to get out of this COVID land with an intact parent-child relationship. and and similarly an intact child-student relationship, right?
What I say to parents when they call me and they're so frustrated is I say, your child is not going to remember whether they got that math assignment in on time or whether they did well on their social studies test 2 or 3 years from now. What they're going to remember is the interactions, the environment in which they had to stay for that year, the family dynamics that they had to endure. That's what they're going to remember. The soft skills that they learned when their mom asked them to help bake cookies with her. Steve, can you address that from your experience with teachers? Are you getting some feedback with the frustration that teachers are having in terms of how they feel they are performing when they see their students are so stressed? Is that a factor in their decisions?
Well, most teachers, most educators have not been trained in how to teach online as the only method or the main method of teaching. And to expect them just to kind of switch from face-to-face to online learning and to be able to do that successfully with no training is foolish. They can't do it. So what they're doing is a really good job, but they're aware in the back of their minds of questions such as, am I doing this right? Are my students learning? How can I keep them more engaged? How can I prevent them becoming fatigued because they're staring at a screen all day? Or how much time do I need to give them away from the screen? Do I need to say, we've got 10 minutes now, every hour, you get up, you walk around, make yourself a drink, you come back. And this is a bigger picture question, so I'm not going to go into it in detail.
Okay.
But the picture that you are presenting from the US is exactly the same picture that we're finding in the UK. Why? Why are these two powers managing to get it badly wrong? And one of the kind of answers that I come up with is our government has been talking about kids being sidelined, being forgotten, the forgotten generation. They're using terms like ruining life chances. We need to enable our kids to catch up. Many of them are falling behind. All those negative phrases, and these are making kids more anxious. Of course, education is important, but it's not as important as one of your parents dying because of COVID, or perhaps you get COVID and you're ill for a very long time. So it's a realistic point of view would be to say to the kids, look, we know, we understand that it's difficult for you, but look, you've got your whole life ahead of you. Mm-hmm. So if we've got to take out this year to make sure you're safe, to make sure that your parents and grandparents are safe, and to get you through this difficult time of isolation, that's what we're going to focus on, not what you will get in your next test or the exams in the summer. And I just think that we adults are creating anxiety in our children needlessly.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more, Steve. And the term forgotten generation is so profoundly disturbing to me. And I do think that there are a lot of ways to teach math, baking, you can teach how to put together a bicycle, take apart a bicycle. We want to encourage curiosity. And we want, it's just not normal for kids to spend 8 hours a day on a screen learning. And
I'm
that's part
glad
of
you're
the
talking about this. This is exactly where I wanted to go, because I think we lose focus on assignments, and we forget, as Dr. Sharon just said, that there are other ways of learning how to do things. I call them the soft skills, and I wanted to kind of get Maureen involved in this a little bit, because Maureen, you mentioned that your concerns are losing time, and that part of that is that students are spending a lot of time trying to navigate the requirements that they need in getting the technology, the books, and so forth. How would you recommend that parents, even teachers, if they see that this is happening, how would you recommend, from a legal perspective perhaps, or from a questioning availability perspective, how would you recommend that parents address this issue if they see that their children are struggling because they don't have what they need? What specifically would you recommend that they do?
Well, if the students are in special education, in the US, I would recommend that they ask for an individualized education program meeting, and that they try to figure out, what would help. I mean, does the child need a bigger screen? Would that be easier to pay attention to? Do they need some actual workbooks instead of being expected for their asynchronous time to be, sitting in front of a screen? Would it help to have some paper and pencil? Do they need more leisure reading? Do they need more time that they're allowed to speak with classmates? I'm not sure what's going on generally, but it seems that some teachers are disabling chat features. And so the little ways that students had to interact even during instruction are not available to them online, even though they're available to we grown-ups when we're Zooming. We can be having crosstalk with other people privately. So I think that, trying to figure out just logistically what would help, what materials would help. And then I think for some students, they need a person with them all the time. The notion of remote learning is, it's sort of like homework. You provide a good environment and then you sit your child in front of it and then you can go away. But for many students with disabilities, that's not going to work at all. And I think that we're basically expecting parents, usually mothers, to leave the labor force and become unpaid aides. And we could be looking at having them become paid aides, or having them find a cousin who's part of their bubble who could become a paid aide. I think the notion that, for all students, but especially for students with disabilities, the notion that parents are just supposed to step up and do what schools used to do is not realistic. So I think that parents should be asking for more from school districts. In the United States, there's a provision that if a parent files for due process and wins, the school district has to pay the parent's attorney's fees, which gives the parent some leverage to press for what the child needs. So I think parents need to be asking for what children need in this environment. There have been several lawsuits trying to force districts to do in-person learning, in some cases trying to force reopenings of schools. That makes me very nervous given what the COVID situation right now. I think it would make a lot more sense to send staffers into homes, or be arranging outdoor activities. It's going to be very difficult for students with disabilities to understand if a parent or a grandparent dies during this. And I think that we can't become so carried away with the need to be in school that we lose sight of the families that people depend on throughout their lives.
I just wrote down some of the things that you said. I hope some of our listeners are writing them down, because these are things that I wouldn't even have thought of to inquire about. I have a child, a grandchild who has some learning challenges, and my daughter-in-law, who is a lawyer, gave up her job to be able to stay home and work with my granddaughter, asking the district to pay her as a one-on-one. My granddaughter is on an IEP. That's a very interesting question to ask. And I think the questions that we ask sometimes are the most important, rather than the advice we're given. A bigger screen, if a child needs a bigger screen, I wouldn't have thought of that. The alternative of some of the learning that's being done, if kids could be given work packets or workbooks so they can follow along. Those are some really good suggestions, and I hope that some of our listeners are jotting those down and will, get in touch with their districts and find out if maybe their children can be supported with some of those ideas. Steve?
I think the best piece of advice I could give parents is something that I learned as a parent myself when I was teaching, and that is that a parent is not a teacher. In a lot of conflict comes from a parent being in the role or trying to be in the role of a teacher and enforcing or trying to enforce learning when they should be a parent. Mm-hmm. And kids resent this, mm-hmm. because they will tell their parents, "You're not a teacher, you're not my teacher, my teacher's in my school." And I think what I would suggest schools do is to give parents a list of suggestions for work or for learning that is different from the kind of learning they would be learning at school. So, for example, we have a pandemic at the moment. And if you're studying history, whether or not it is in this era, why not look at other forms of plague and death throughout the ages? So the Black Death. What did people do in the Black Death that people nowadays don't do because we've got medicines, antibiotics, we've got communication methods that wouldn't have been dreamed of then. And then you can find some writings from people who lived through that period. Is a pandemic the same as being in a war? What are the similarities? What are the differences? So what I'm suggesting is a kind of project-based approach where the parent can help to suggest different avenues to explore, but it's the child who's doing the exploring and the child presenting that learning in whatever way they wish, including for those kids who do, well, every kid has a phone, so they could interview their friends about how they would feel if they'd been living in the time of the Black Death. What is the difference between then and now? And what we're trying to do is, I think we're trying to get them to cope with the pandemic without allowing them to express enough about how they feel themselves. What emotions are they going through, living through this unprecedented event, which is not only countrywide, but it's global. And that just takes away the pressure from the parent of having to think, right, I'm going to teach a lesson now, and it's an hour long, and it's about this. It's a different form of learning, and I think the kids would enjoy it, because while they're staring at a screen, in terms of interaction and looking at PowerPoints, that's not the same as exploring Google and finding your own references and looking up stuff and finding images and putting them together.
I like that, because instead of Tom Sawyer being on the literature list, the kids could be reading things that were more appropriate, not more appropriate, but more related to what they're going through, and maybe be able to connect those feelings with what they're feeling. Dr. Sharon had wanted to say something, and then I'll go to Maureen. Go ahead.
I just think that it's important to include kids in whatever interventions you're thinking about. Because if kids don't have buy-in, they're not really going to participate. And this is particularly true for kids with ADHD, who've heard or kids who have learning disabilities, or even who are high functioning on the spectrum. But they've heard for most of their academic lives at home, and maybe non-academic lives, about the ways they've missed the mark, about how they haven't measured up, and how they should do things in a particular way that may or may not fit with their brain. And so it's really important when you're thinking about how you want to meet a student where they are, how you want to create a learning process that works better for them, that you include them in some way, even young children. You know, I have a second grader, I'm working with right now, and he's 7, and he can tell me flat out, like, what interests him, what doesn't, what he wants to do, how he's struggling with online school. And he's going back to hybrid school, which is a great thing for him, although much riskier for the family because of wanting to see grandparents and such. But you know, I think that he doesn't hang out for our whole 50-minute session, but he does participate a little bit. And that's really particularly true for teenagers, whether kids are neurodiverse or not. One thing that I'm seeing is that kids who are used to really doing very well at school, in-person school, are struggling much more now because they're not getting some of those, that good energy that they use to help them thrive in school. The subtle and not so subtle support and encouragement from both peers and teachers.
Before I go to Maureen, I just want to mention that I'm working with 2 students right now, and some of their 2 of the students I'm working with, one of their high levels of anxiety is due to the hybrid method, where they're home and they feel safe, and having to go to school where they're concerned about getting COVID, about bringing it to their family, about all the people that they're seeing who are so sick. So there's a balance there. You know, we want our kids in school. But there's also, they've been seeing things on the news and hearing things about the virus, and there's also a level of anxiety that is underlying there about actually going into school. Let me hop over to Maureen for a minute. I know you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I just had 2 other thoughts about ways of changing the nature of instruction part of the time to keep students engaged. One is using, movies. I have a friend who teaches film in a college, and they have a bunch of movies that anybody can log on to and watch for free. And he puts out discussion questions for his students. That would be a way of giving families something to do together that they would probably enjoy. And it's a screen, but it's not Zoom, at least.
Yeah.
And also, I, having worked a lot with children with autism and having children with autism myself, I really like flashcards. When my children were 2, either they didn't exist in such wonderful quality and quantity, or I didn't know where to find them. I wound up staying up till 3 a.m. making them and laminating them. Now there are places like teacher supply stores, Different Roads to Learning, difflearn.com, where you can buy wonderful cards for all kinds of things. And that's a way of doing fluency practice and making things easier for students. That's not, filling in things on a fluency practice thing on a computer. I'm working right now on setting up a home program for a student who is not able to learn virtually. And I've just bought a bunch of cards, and they have these great things like places. And I realized that, many 5 and 6-year-olds have never been to a lot of these places. And just giving both movies and some of these more elaborate card sets are ways of, sharing the world with students in this time when children's worlds are necessarily very restricted.
Yeah, flashcards aren't just math facts anymore. I know that Dr. Sharon has to leave in a few minutes, so I want to give her an opportunity to first weigh in on this last part. We didn't get anywhere nearly into so many of the topics that I had, but I do want to get to I hope we can do this again, because I think that we just touched on so many important things that I'm hoping we'll be able to kind of delve into them more specifically at another time. But I want you to have a few minutes, Dr. Sharon, to say a few words on what you would like to address. I gave everybody a list of topics, and I hope that you had an opportunity to look at them and see if there's anything in particular that you feel you want to take a few minutes and really delve into, give some good advice, ask some good questions, some way that you feel that the virtual teaching, that COVID has impacted our lives in a glaring way.
Right. So, I mean, you in the number of questions that you offered, and you asked, what are some simple steps teachers can take to address their own mental health?
Yes.
And what advice do you have for kids, parents, and supporting family and social issues related to anxiety? So I'm going to take these on.
Okay, good.
So first I'm going to start with, I want to say something. So in my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Empowering Kids for Success in School and Life, I talk about the 5 C's of ADHD parenting, and they're actually the 5 C's of really good, solid parenting, but they specifically apply to parents of neurodiverse kids, in that these 5 C's are essential for helping foster a positive connection with kids and helping them grow into the independent adults that they want to be and you want to see them. So the first C, this is self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. So that first C, self-control, is what I want to talk about. The first, well, maybe all of them. Who knows how?
I've used that book, I have, because I told you that. And I've used that book with some of my students, and the parents love it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. That's lovely to hear. So when we talk about, simple steps that we can take to deal with our own mental health as adults, whether we're teachers or parents, we're looking at the first C, self-control. We have to manage ourselves first before we can manage or assist kids around us. Because if you are dysregulated as a parent, if you are depressed as a teacher, if you're struggling with anxiety every day, as an educational support person, it's going to be a lot harder to connect with students and meet them where they are, which is that second C, compassion. I'm going to meet kids where they are. And so one of the things that's important is for you to think about, what nurtures me right now? What are some things that actually feed me? And how can I incorporate that into my daily or my weekly life? So for me, I know that getting outside of my house is important. And it's not super appealing to do that when it's cold and it's snowing. And this morning I woke up and I was like, ugh. But, I made myself get dressed and go outside, because I know that if I don't do that, I'm going to sink into the pit. And I don't want to go into the pit. So I went outside and I, spent some time walking around. It was quiet and beautiful and white, and I actually felt a little better. So it's, and I have like on a little Post-it next to my bed, like 5 things that I can do to help myself get out of bed every morning, and I think that it's important. I mean, or to make each day a little brighter. I shouldn't say it that darkly, but it is tough. And sometimes, we don't have a choice. We have to work. We have to support our family. We have kids coming into our bedrooms. So what are some things that are going to help you? And is it going outside? Is it, when your kids are having some free TVs or screen time, doing a 15-minute meditation or a yoga. What is going to feed you? And I think this is very important, not just for parents, but also for teachers, because if you don't address your mental health, if you spend all day teaching online and you get off and then you have to deal with your own family and then you go to bed, I'm telling you, when the morning comes, you'll need your Post-it with the things to help you get out of bed.
Do you share that Post-it?
I will not share that Post-it because that is mine. But I will share that for me, exercise is very important. And that's one of the things that I do. I will share that I encourage you to make a playlist of songs you really love, that when you're feeling kind of down, you can listen to. And I encourage kids I work with to do that too, and that helps. So I want to say something about parents and supporting their kids with social issues that are causing anxiety. And the thing that we want to understand is that kids desperately want to connect with peers, and they're stuck connecting with peers online. And connecting online socially has a lot of pros, but it has a lot of cons. And those cons have to do with bullying or saying the wrong thing or being put on the spot or having people say something about you that you're not aware of. So we want to make sure that our kids are actually connecting with other kids appropriately. Can they meet people outside with their mask on at a distance? Can you facilitate that as a parent? What sorts of ways are they connecting with their friends? Are they on Discord while they're playing a video game? And even though you as a parent may not like that, if you hear them laughing and whooping, that's okay because they're still socializing. So we have to adjust our expectations of how to socialize right now, and we have to offer our kids tools on how to manage.
That's
and then
great.
I will just stop there.
Thank you. Those were some wise words. I appreciate that. Steve, Maureen, would one of you like to have some final thoughts on a particular subject that will, directly speaking to either teachers or parents?
Well, I assume it's possible to record chats and to tell students that chats are going to be recorded. And in that sense, it's less ephemeral and easier to monitor and deal with than the kind of communications that would be happening in person in school, in bullying of students.
That's a good question, and parents maybe should ask that question. I'm not sure whether that's that we can do that or not, but that's a good question to ask.
Yeah, so I think these things happened anyway. They happened outside of school through social media anyway. Mm-hmm. And things like having a breakout room for students to talk. You might want a parent there facilitating and monitoring a breakout room. So I think, districts, if they are making these things available, they do need to look at whether students are being bullied, whether racist things are being said in the chats and that sort of thing. So yeah, there are definitely legal implications of that. I did want to say something about systemic racism mm-hmm. and class-based inequalities. One thing that I am very worried about spending time on social media is the level of explicit racism that I'm afraid students are hearing at home in much of this country, and that is probably going to, pop up when they come back to school mm-hmm. quite forcefully. And I'm not sure what to do in this polarized environment, but I think that we're going to see some very ugly things, and that to the extent that schools can be, sending out books that don't come off as preachy and cause, right-wing parents to throw them away, but that, portray people of different backgrounds in positive lights. I think we need to be doing what we can to head off some of the racism that is undoubtedly happening in many families. I also think it's a really good idea for parents whose children can't read to teach them to read during this off time. Zig Engelman wrote a scripted program for teaching reading called Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. It's readily available. And I think that that goes a long way towards making children feel comfortable in school when they can access the main way of getting information. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of students. My children learned to read in a week when they were 4 with not that program, but a systematic, explicit, synthetic phonics instruction. And then one of my children went to a religious school and he wasn't learning to read Hebrew. And I thought, what is this? And it turned out nobody had told him that it was right to left, or that the letters not only had names, but had sounds, and that you blended them. So when I filled him in on these things, he outpaced my Hebrew reading in a few hours. So I think,
Wow.
their IQ does not predict ability to learn to decode. Many students just are never taught to read. So I would suggest trying to teach your child to read during this period. And I would also recommend that families and educators read Engelman's book, Teaching Needy Children in Our Backward System. I think it's a really great book about what's wrong with American education, and that it has a lot to say. I mean, I think we tend to say, well, the academics don't matter so much as the soft skills, but sometimes I think the best things that educators can do are to focus on actually helping children learn and giving them a structured environment rather than trying to make school overly about feelings. For English learners, a lot of schools have Rosetta Stone site licenses. They ought to be encouraging parents who are laid off to take this opportunity to learn English. Mango is often available through public libraries. So I think working on increasing the resources of families which have been disserved is really important and can be done.
Those are some great suggestions. I wish I had time to go over them, but I want to give Steve some time to have the final word here and address, maybe you can put together some of the issues that have come out between parents and teachers and kind of sync them the best way. Maybe parents can speak with teachers if they have some issues, maybe the best way for teachers to talk to parents and alleviate some of this anxiety, or maybe you have another thing you'd like to address. What would you like to say?
A couple of things. Firstly, one of my kind of phrases is that if a school doesn't make time to build relationships with its parents, it will spend its time solving problems with the parents. So it's important that you have that relationship and that you recognize that that's part of a school's role to establish those relationships. And I'm going to parody our education system. So the government tell teachers what to teach. Then we inspect schools to make sure that teachers are doing what the government tells them to do. And then teachers tell the kids what to do in order to get them to learn so they can pass exams, so that they can then say that our school is a really good school because loads of kids pass exams. Well, if we break into that system and say, we've talked a lot about how pupils, how students, how children are reacting, being taught online instead of face-to-face. So I haven't seen anywhere that somebody has suggested, well, if we've got our class in front of us, why don't we have a conversation with them about how they see learning in this way and what they would suggest we do in the next 50 minutes to make it more possible that they enjoy their learning. It seems that teachers are now in the frame of mind that they are the experts and they must get it right with these kids. But is anybody asking the kids how to structure the lesson? Probably not. So if the kids come back and say, look, we're okay for 20 minutes, but after 20 minutes, our heads just go, well, let's put a little break in 20 minutes and do something else. So it's, learning should be a relationship between the teacher and the students and be negotiated to a certain extent. And I don't see very much of that negotiation happening because teachers are too afraid of being judged that they're not doing what they've been told to do.
That's awesome. I was busy writing some of that down. This time has just flown by. We have not had an opportunity to talk about gifted students. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about standardized testing. There were just so many things I wanted to talk about, but we didn't get them. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get you all together down the road so we can do this again. You guys did an amazing job, and I appreciate so much all the time that you spent putting into preparing for this, that you gave to me. And I know that our listeners are going to go away with some very important questions. If not answers, they have good questions that they can then go and explore. I hope they will get in touch with you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, mentors, for joining us. If you enjoyed the panel discussion, please look for us on social media or go to justeducationfirst.com and look over our other podcasts. I hope you will all be well and that you will stay connected. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Judith, for having us here. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, Steve and Maureen, and of course, you, Judith, and all the wisdom that you all bring. If you would like to stay connected to me, please go to my website, www.drsharonsaline.com. Or follow me on Facebook, or both.
Yes, thank you, Judith, for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion. It's been fascinating, and it just strikes me how much we agree between the US and the UK about some of the issues that we face in our education systems.
Yeah, it's been great talking to all of you. You can contact me by email if you want at maureen@maureengraves.com.
Thank you, guys. Again, I so appreciate all your time, your wisdom, and your enthusiasm. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.